Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to dive into the incredible 30-year story of India's economic transformation. It's this massive journey that saw the country completely reinvent how it does business, how it banks, and even how it takes care of its people. So yeah, let's get right into it.
But to really get this massive reboot, we have to start with the most basic question. Why? Why was this even necessary in the first place? What was so broken about the old system that it needed such a dramatic, decades-long overhaul? Answering that is the key to understanding, well, everything that happened next.
So before we can talk about the solutions, we have to really understand the problem. Our story kicks off with what you could call India's big economic wake-up call. All those deep-seated issues that were holding the country back right before this great reset in 1991.
So before 1991, India's economy was really caught in a trap. The banking sector was super inefficient and it locked a huge part of the population out. This forced millions of people to turn to really exploitative, informal credit just to get by. And at the same time, the banks themselves were drowning under this growing mound of bad loans, what we call non-performing assets. On top of all that, you had this ridiculously complex tax system that just made everything more expensive, and there was basically no social safety net for most people. The whole system was just creaking under the strain.
So where do you even start to fix a system that's this broken? Well, you start at the very heart of the economy, its financial system. The first huge wave of reform was all about hitting the reset button on India's banks.
Now, this wasn't some quick one-and-done deal. The approach was super methodical, and it was guided by these two landmark committees, both chaired by M. Narasimham. The first one, back in '91, laid out the first real blueprint for change. Then, the second one, in '98, was brought in to check on the progress, tackle new problems that had popped up, and really push the reforms even further to make Indian banks competitive on a global scale.
The vision that first committee had was pretty radical. It was a complete reorganization of the whole banking system into 4 clear tiers. Right at the top, you'd have a few giant banks big enough to compete internationally. Then, a layer of national banks to offer services all over the country. Below that, local banks for specific regions, and finally, rural banks that were totally focused on farming and agriculture. The goal was actually pretty simple and elegant. Build a system where every single part of the economy has a bank that's designed just for its needs.
Okay, so restructuring was one thing, but you still had this, festering problem of bad loans, and a system where failing companies could just hang around for years, dragging the whole credit system down with them. The next set of reforms had to build the tools to finally deal with that mess.
First off, let's just be clear on what we're talking about. When we say bad loans, the official term is a non-performing asset, or an NPA. Put simply, it's a loan that stopped doing its job for the bank. The borrower isn't making payments anymore. And this huge pileup of NPAs was one of the biggest threats to the stability of India's banks.
So how do you force a resolution? Well, you put a clock on it. The real game-changing solution came along in 2016. It was called the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, or IBC. Before this, resolving a failed company could drag on for years and years. The IBC introduced a strict, tight deadline. This number, 330 days, became the new rule. It was the absolute maximum time allowed to figure out a company's fate, either fix it or sell it off. It was designed to be fast and final.
Now, all these big institutional reforms are obviously super important. But you might be wondering, what about the average person? Well, the next phase of this whole transformation focused directly on building a financial safety net for the hundreds of millions of people who had always been left out of the system. And the scale of what they did here it's just staggering. In 2015, 3 huge schemes were launched. They offered accident insurance, life insurance, and a pension plan, all designed to be incredibly cheap. By 2021, the numbers spoke for themselves. Over 23 crore, that's 230 million people, signed up for accident insurance. Over 100 million got life insurance, and 30 million joined a pension plan. It was just this massive, unprecedented expansion of a social safety net.
But maybe the most ambitious plan of all was in healthcare. In 2018, the Ayushman Bharat scheme, also called PMJA, promised something revolutionary. It gave a health cover of 5 lakh rupees, that's $500,000 per family per year. For millions of people, this was basically a shield against the kind of massive hospital bills that could literally destroy a family's entire life savings.
And the scale?
It was just mind-boggling. The scheme targeted nearly 11 crore of the country's poorest and most vulnerable families. That meant it was trying to cover around 500 million people. It instantly became the largest public health insurance program anywhere in the world, designed to protect a huge slice of the population from the crippling costs of getting sick.
All right, so we've covered banking and Social Security. The final piece of this 30-year puzzle was, you could argue, the most complicated and ambitious of them all, completely redesigning India's messy, tangled-up tax system.
And the entire idea behind this huge overhaul can really be summed up in this one powerful motto: one tax, one market, one nation. This was the big promise of the Goods and Services Tax, or GST, which finally happened in 2017 after years and years of work. And wow, the change was dramatic. The old system was just this chaotic mess of different taxes from both the central government and the states. You had excise duty, service tax, VAT, sales tax. The list just went on and on. It basically created tax walls between states and led to this tax-on-tax situation that just drove prices up. GST came in and swept all of that away, replacing it with one single unified tax for the entire country.
Now, GST isn't just one single rate. It's structured into 4 main slabs: 5, 12, 18, and 28%. The idea is that essential stuff gets taxed at the lower rates and luxury items get the highest rate. A few major things like petrol and alcohol for people to drink were kept outside of GST, but for almost every other good and service, this new structure created that single, unified national market. So, from a banking system that was on the brink of collapse, to creating the world's largest health insurance scheme, from cleaning up bad loans to knitting a whole subcontinent into a single market, it has been a truly remarkable 30-year journey. But I think the key thing to remember is that reform like this is never really done, which leaves us with one last question to think about. After all this, what's the next great economic mountain for India to climb? Thanks for joining us.